Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. And in the den today, we're taking a look at the last of the classic Universal Mummy movies, The Mummy's Curse from 1944. I've been reviewing the Mummy movies all this month, October of 2024. We're finally coming to the end, to the last, and these movies have really ranged from ones that I quite liked to ones that I thought had some real problems. Everything in between. Well, let's take a look and see how this one works out. And so, as I said, Universal presents Lon Chaney Jr., of course, in The Mummy's Curse, copyright 1944. So this will be the fourth film he has been in, appearing as Kharis, the mummy who came after Imhotep. And we're going to be running through this entire movie in this video. So let's beware of spoilers because they are a-coming. So this film stars, and stars might be too big of a word here. Peter Coe, I couldn't really find much information on him. He plays Dr. Ilzor Zandab, heck of a name. Virginia Christine is playing Princess Ananka in this film. Kay Harding is Betty Walsh. Dennis Moore is Dr. James Halsey. Martin Kozlek as Rageb. And Kurt Koch is Cajun Joe. And you don't get a much more Cajun name than Kurt Koch. Screenplay is by Bernard Schubert from an original story and adaptation by Leon Abrams and Dwight V. Babcock. Now, Schubert was writing films, I think, from the silent era on. Wrote Peck's Bad Boy, which most people haven't heard of now. It was once a really big movie. Mark of the Vampire. Also did The Frozen Ghost. Also starred Lon Chaney Jr. That was one of those Inner Sanctum movies. And I'm also mentioned that the music in this film was done by William Lava and Paul Sawtell. Lava, of course, was like the last of the composers for the sort of classic era of Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies. The film is directed by Leslie Goodwin. Now, he mostly worked in comedy. From the silent era, started off as a gag writer. He worked his way up into directing, worked with folks like Leon Earl, Snub Pollard, Ben Turpin, which again, names that are not as well known now to people, but you know, they were pretty big names in their day in comedy. And then later on in TV, he did work, I think, directing and maybe even some writing for F Troop, Gilligan's Island, and My Favorite Martian. But here he is doing a horror film, and he did do a few non-comedy movies, but not many. Comedy seems to be, and especially comedy shorts, seem to be what he mostly worked in his career. So we open this film at Tanta Bertha's. It's a cafe in the Bayou. Now, if you've been watching these reviews, Bayou is going to hit and you're going to go, wait, what? Yeah, just hold on. And we get a musical number because there's no better way to start off a mummy movie than with a musical number. And actually, she's got a French, it may even be a Belgian accent. I kind of picked up that it from some of the dialogue, but a French accent, and it kind of reminded me of watching Allo Allo. If you've never watched that Britcom, I suggested it's pretty damn good. And so we start with this little sort of argument. Now, there's been this work done to reclaim some swampland in the bayou to, drain the swamp, etc. And it's running into trouble. The fella over with the hat on there, the brimmed hat, is Cajun Joe. And he's like the foreman. And this other dude's telling him, look, you ain't going to have any workers on this thing because people are afraid to work in the swamp. Because every full moon, the mummy rises from the swamp with his princess, and people are scared. And so Cajun Joe here is sort of the voice of reason for us. And he's like, that mummy hasn't been seen for 25 years. So he's not denying the mummy necessarily. It hasn't been seen for 25 years. Everybody's safe. You better show up to work. You get the idea. Now let's do a little timeline check. The Mummy's Hand, the first of the Kharis films, is set in 1940. And there were times where I thought, well, maybe it wasn't. But then looking back over, I saw, oh yeah, that's right. There's a piece of paper in there, clearly 1940. So that movie is definitely set in 1940. Now, The Mummy's Tomb, the sequel, is set 30 years later, 1970. The Mummy's Ghost, which comes after that, maybe a year or two after, so 71, 72. So this is set apparently 25 years after the mummy walked into the swamp in The Mummy's Ghost, which means it is set in 1997, 2 years before Brendan Fraser's great mummy movies premiere. So keep that in mind in this movie. This is 1997. Not going to see a whole lot of grunge, but trust me, it's 1990s. Actually, 1997 was post-grunge, now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah, golly. I was almost a dad by that point. Yeah, so the grunge days were over. Anyways, let us move on. Now, besides the whole timeline thing, we also have to contend with the fact that the last movie was very clearly set in Massachusetts. So Kharis walked into a swamp with the poor Ananka in Massachusetts. This movie is set in Louisiana. They're not going to really ever explain that. They just don't worry about it. We've just changed the location. So I guess we could pretend the other movies were actually set in Louisiana too. It probably wouldn't have made that much difference other than people not, having the accents, I guess. So at any rate, so Mr. Walsh here is in charge with the Southern Engineering Company of clearing this swamp. And he's doing his best to get these guys to stay on the job. A man has disappeared, a man named Antoine. Everybody's very worried. And so Walsh takes the very interesting tack of insulting everybody to get them to work. So I guess he probably ought to work at PR in Hollywood now. But the men, for some weird reason, are not persuaded by his insulting language. And they think that Antoine's disappearance is proof of the mummy stories. At this point, Dr. Halsey appears with Ilzor from the Scripps Museum. So we're still sticking with the Scripps Museum. They've come down to retrieve the bodies of the mummy, Kharis and Ananka. Now you noticed Ilzor wearing a fez. We've had definite trouble with men in fezzes in this movie. So the Walsh is not real thrilled with this. This is going to delay his work. He doesn't care if they have permission. He doesn't care if they have permits. Walsh is generally a pretty angry guy. Now, his secretary and also niece, Betty, is a little more intrigued by the young doctor and his mission. And I like Betty in this film. She's cool, doesn't get nearly enough screen time, but a lot of charisma in Kay Harding. She was pretty good. I would say the women in this movie, more charisma than the men. Actresses more charisma than the actors in this film. And so there's some light flirting between Betty and Halsey. It's very light because Halsey's a little bit stiff. And they talk a little bit about how the last movie ended, and again, no sign of why it's suddenly in Louisiana. They don't come up with some explanation. They're just hand waving that one. It's now in Louisiana. Just deal with it, folks. So as that, tender scene ends, a man busts in. That man, in fact, Gooby. Yeah, Gooby. Reporting that Antoine has been discovered dead. Bum, bum, bum. And we get this kind of, fearful glances between Ilzor and Halsey. And then they send Gooby he's sent to go find Cajun Joe because they're going to need him on the job here. He's still at the bar. And he tells everybody right in front of Cajun Joe that Antoine has been found with a knife in his back. So this really improves the morale on the job site. So at the site of the murder, Dr. Cooper pronounces the murder to have happened the day before, and Halsey discovers what might be a clue. Kind of looks like a mummy wrapping. They also discover this man-shaped hole, and at this point, the workers are going, "Oh yeah, man, like I'm calling in sick tomorrow because there's some weird stuff going on." And Gooby exclaims, and I love this quote, "The devil's on the loose, and he's dancing with the mummy." I don't really even know what that means exactly, but I really liked it. So we now cut back to Ilzor, and he is rowing this boat through the swamp in the middle of the night. So nothing weird about that at all. And waiting for him on the bank is Ragheb. Now, I think this is where we get to the first error in this film. I think Kozlek is a much stronger actor than Coe. Now, when we get to the end, it might make sense why they went the way they went. But I think that had you had somebody like Kozlek playing this role of sort of the main bad guy, he could have added more menace to it, and you could have probably done more with it. Coe is kind of stiff in terms of his acting. He doesn't have a lot of gravitas, a lot of weight to his performance. So at any rate, though, Ragheb is waiting for him, and he lets them know that that they have recovered Kharis, and he's up in this ruined monastery. Notice those stairs, kind of reminiscent of the stairs leading up to the temple in the mummy's the mummy's hand, and we saw it a couple other times in the other films. He also let him know that the people who helped carry him up there in the sarcophagus were liquidated. They're gone. So nobody's going to be able to talk. Now, I did find that interesting, though. I'm guessing they brought their own sarcophagus because obviously Kharis didn't carry his sarcophagus into the swamp with him. But you're going, well, maybe it would have been easier if you weren't. Well, I guess if you have to move the sarcophagus all the way up the stairs, you might as well put Kharis in the thing while you're doing it. At any rate, the monastery set is actually pretty cool. I like it. It's not as cool as that sort of temple thing that they had in the mummy's hand, but I dig it. It's a good set. And so at this point, Ilzor puts on the medallion and the robe. So we know for sure he is the next high priest who's been sent, in this case, to retrieve Kharis and Ananka and bring them back to Egypt. And so he's in charge. Ragheb is going to be sort of his assistant. And we also get our first glance now at Kharis, Lon Chaney Jr., in the full makeup, lying in the sarcophagus. And we get the recital of the Tana tea recipe, 3 leaves in the full moon to keep his heart beating, 9 leaves for him to be able to move around and strangle people and do all that kind of fun mummy stuff. And finally, Ragheb is made to swear on the medallion that he will not betray Kharis and Ilzor, and then he is to learn of his mission. And so now we go into flashback time, and we get the story that we've seen many times here. Princess Ananka's death, Kharis' punishment for trying to raise her from the dead. We do see the clips with Tom Tyler as the mummy. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Yeah, Chaney wasn't in the mummy's hand. I apologize for that. This would be the third mummy movie that Chaney's done. So we get Tom Tyler. We get to see Boris Karloff again. It's basically, the clips that we've seen a few times. And we also get a brief explanation of an American archaeologist brought Kharis and Ananka to America. They don't mention Steve Banning by name here at all. And He also mentions that there have been 2 priests sent previously to recover the mummy, and both of them have died violent deaths. So Ilzor is number 3. And so Kharis is now awakened. You see him staggering up. Again, good makeup, good job on the mummy. All of these movies, really good work on the makeup. I will say that. And the sets have always been really nice too. Story sometimes has suffered a little bit, but the trappings of the movies are always really nice. Now, at this point, the unluckiest guy in the bayou stumbles in, Michael, who is the self-appointed caretaker of the ruined monastery, because he says it's still holy ground and sacred ground. And he's chewing these guys out. You're not supposed to be here. What are you doing? Yada, yada, yada. And at this point, Kharis decides to take matters into his own hands. And by that, I mean he takes Michael's neck into his own hands and strangles him. We see the silhouette of the evil deed done. And typically, Kharis is acting under orders in these movies. But at the end of the last one, it seems like he goes rogue a little bit. And so here he's sort of asserting himself as well. And it's nice to see him coming out of his shell. So the next day, as the bell is ringing for the end of the workday, a bulldozer rolls over this particular patch of earth. And after it passes, we see a human hand reach up. There we are, reach up from the ground. Princess Ananka has just entered the chat. The scene where she's rising from the earth is actually really well done. It looks really good. So as she gets out, she sort of struggles to stand. She's falling a little bit. She seems blinded by the sunlight. And you know, when you've been sleeping for 25 years, it's tough to get moving in the morning without a cup of coffee. Maybe some Folgers mountain-grown coffee. Yes, of course. Ananka is played by Mrs. Olsen, famous for the coffee commercials back in the day. And you know what? She does a great job in this movie. She really does. So she finally makes it to her feet, and she's sort of stumbling away, kind of like a zombie. Now, the last time we saw her, she had aged incredibly quickly as she was being carried into the swamp. Here, she looks young again, which is just proof of what a good mud pack can do for your skin. And so she wanders into this pond, and this is going to clean her up. And as she's emerging again, Cajun Joe happens to see her. And now you see, all cleaned up, kind of has a Betty Page look because of those bangs. And, he's trying to figure out who is this and what are you doing here? And says, I better take her to Tanta Bertha's. And so he leads her off. And as he's doing so, she's sort of muttering. She's still kind of in a trance and says the word Kharis. And as she does that, we see that Ragheb is nearby and has overheard this. And he scurries off to the monastery to tell Ilzor. And so basically we have a Polish Cajun leading a Swedish Egyptian to Tanta Bertha's while a German Arab runs off to tell on them. It's just a weird movie, folks. It's just a weird movie. So back at the monastery, the hour has come. Ananka has been found. Kharis must retrieve her. Any who stand in his way are going to have to be killed. Again, love that monastery. It's a nice effect. So off Kharis goes, and he's probably again going, could we set up closer to town? I got a bad leg. It would really be helpful. But no, they always make him. Sometimes it's not so much the work, it's the commute. So he quickly though gets to town and makes it to the cafe, and he sees through the window his lady love, Ananka. And since he's not, big on long engagements, he busts right in. And Ananka, who's sort of being put to bed by Tanta Bertha, sees him. And this is another. So this, I've already said one thing I thought they could have maybe done better was in terms of the casting of the villain. Now, this is another, though. This scene is not really directed for horror. Imagine if instead, Tanta Bertha puts her, to bed. She's sort of still kind of out of it. And she hears some noises outside. And so she goes to the door to open it to check. And when she opens the door, there's the mummy standing right there. Now you get a little bit of a jump scare. The one thing I've noticed about most of these movies is they don't heighten that tension and ramp it up and then get you. It's just sort of like, look, they're mummies. They're scary. It's a scary movie because of mummies. Yeah, but we're in the movie audience and we've seen these movies. So the mummy's not as maybe scary to us as it could have been. So anyways, just something I've noted. They don't direct these things to really scare you. They're just telling a story about a mummy. So at any rate, so while he attacks Tanta Bertha, Ananka flees. And I noticed that, in the end of the last one, Ananka sort of passes out at the end and is very passive. Now this Ananka, a little more active. She's getting up. She's trying to get away. So I'm wondering if by the end, we're not going to get something a little closer to Ankhsenamen when she was faced with, the mummy and sort of, really struggling, really fighting to free herself from him. But we'll see. We'll see towards the end how that ends up going. So she does flee into the swamp with Kharis in very slow pursuit because he's Kharis. And I think it's also worth mentioning at this point that our ostensible hero for the picture, Halsey, has been off screen for a really long time. And I think you could almost make the argument that he's not really the hero of the movie. There may not really be a hero per se. Maybe Ananka's the heroine? We'll see as we go. So as she runs through the swamp, Ananka finally collapses. She's great in a sprint, but no good at all in long distance. But before Kharis can pull up quick and retrieve her, our hero, is he our hero? Our hero finally shows up with Betty. They were taking a drive and they find her body and decide to take her back to camp to Dr. Cooper so he can, see if she's okay. As Halsey's putting her in the car, Betty goes back to retrieve her coat, her wrap, or I guess that was Betty's coat. And Kharis is creeping up behind her. Oh, you want to steal girlfriends, huh, buddy? Well, two can play at that game. Missed her by that much. And so missing his chance at grabbing Betty, he goes back into the swamp. Back at the cafe, Tanta Bertha's body has been found. The doctor examines her, declares this woman is dead. Big shock to everybody at this point. But we do get she was strangled. There's mold on the neck. So clearly the Kharis, the mummy thing. Now, again, if this is still technically set in the same town where all this stuff happened, Mapleton, but now it's Mapleton, Louisiana instead of Mapleton, Massachusetts, that would mean something to the locals. The mold would be a sign of this. I don't know if that's really the case. They just don't really, they just keep it kind of unclear. So back at the camp, Ananka finally awakens from her sort of trance or sleep, whatever you want to call it, makes a noise. And so Halsey and the doctor rush back in. And now she's capable of speaking. And she's very confused, doesn't know what's been going on. She has apparently lost her memory, which is probably a blessing considering all the things this poor woman has been through. And so the doctor says, look, she's an amnesiac. What she needs is something to keep her busy while her memories slowly return. So, if you can find something for her to do, and Halsey says, well, I can make her sort of a lab assistant. That'll give her something to do. That'll keep her busy. Okay. So good plan. So we next see, the next day, we see Ananka. She's doing the field work and smiling, the sun shining on her face. She seems very happy. And, Halsey is like, hey, you're getting too much sun. You got to be careful. And she's like, oh, no, I can't get enough sun. This is wonderful. Well, keep in mind, she's been buried for 25 years. And here it gets interesting. She says to Halsey, oh, this is definitely mummy wrappings, this cloth. And that kind of floors him. And she goes on to say, well, this is woven at the time of King Amenophis, and it was worn by Kharis. And this is even more amazing to him. And he asks her how she knows, and she kind of gets creeped out. She's like, I don't know how I know. I feel like I'm having a strange dream. She's in a really weird place here. And it sort of puts her back into her trance, and she starts walking, away, and she sees Ilzor and walks towards him, and he bows to her. And Halsey's kind of like, do you know this woman? Ilzor's like, no, I don't know her. And he quickly goes back into her tent. And she starts following him, saying, Kharis. And so Halsey kind of shakes her out of the trance, and he's worried about her. And Ilzor now, hearing the name Kharis and knowing this is the princess for sure, runs off to tell his mummy. And so getting back there, he's like, okay, we still got some full moon left. You need to go retrieve your princess. Personally, I'm not going to do it for you. And so off Kharis goes, and he eventually reaches the field camp that Halsey has set up. And as he enters the camp, Ananka in her tent awakens. So Ananka, catches sight. She walks out of the tent, catches sight of Kharis, and then rushes to the tent of Dr. Cooper. So, he's probably a dead duck. And she tells him that Kharis is coming for her and feels as though she's two different people and sometimes surrounded by strange people and surroundings. And she begs him not to leave her, and then she freezes and says, do you hear? And Cooper steps out of the tent and recoils at the sight of Kharis approaching. And he enters the tent, and I love the way she's recoiling from the shadow of his hand as it gets closer to her, and he passes by her. The doctor rushes to protect her, and, well, you kind of know how that goes. This is actually, to me, one of the more effective horror scenes in the movie. They did a good job with this one. So while he's, killing the doctor, Ananka flees into the swamp, and Kharis follows her. So the next morning, everyone gathers to be yelled at by Walsh. Halsey, ever since you showed up, there's nothing but trouble, blah, blah, blah. And Halsey's like, dude, it ain't my fault. I didn't do this. And he goes, you're not really helping matters by ignoring this whole mummy angle. Like, there's stuff going on and you're not dealing with it. As Cajun Joe looks on, yeah, man, what about the mummy? So Halsey and Cajun Joe decide, we got to find the girl who's disappeared. We got to find Ananka to solve this whole caper. And Ilzor tries to talk him out of, oh, it's a big mistake. You don't want to do that. So they go out searching that night, and with Ilzor and Rakeb helping, which is probably the last thing in the world you would want, they split up to search, and Cajun Joe goes rowing off on his own, and he sees Ananka walking through the woods. And he follows her and is calling for her, but she ignores him, and then out comes Kharis. And that's it for Cajun Joe, which is sad because he was a good guy and actually a good character. I wasn't real sure about Cajun Joe at the beginning, but I really rather liked him. I was sorry to see him go. And one thing you can definitely say for Mummy's Curse, compared to Mummy's Ghost, a lot more energy, especially from Ananka, which I really do appreciate. Ananka, meanwhile, finds her way back to the camp, and seeks shelter with Betty in the tent with the light. And so she's definitely showing a fear of the dark and of the night, which again makes sense. She's been buried for 25 years away from the sun. So Kharis now enters the camp after them again. He's going to go into the tent. Betty hears some noise. He comes in, and she looks on her horror as he grabs Ananka and drags her out of the tent and collapses the tent as he goes. And so now he picks her up. She's got the white gown going, and he's going to carry her off into the swamp. And again, you notice his like right arm completely useless right up until the point where he has to carry a girl with both arms, and then that sucker works pretty well. So now we're in the end game, and this is where the last movie kind of petered out. You remember everybody's sort of wandering around aimlessly. Peanut the dog is leading people to the mummy, who just kind of slips out and walks into the swamp with Ananka. The end. So we'll see how this one goes. So when Betty gets out of the tent, she meets Ragheb, and he says, "I'm going to take you to Dr. Halsey." Yeah, sure. And so we see the mummy walking through the swamp, carrying her, again, very gothic looking. And as that's happening, Halsey returns to camp from the search. We find the collapsed tent. Gooby is there, and he's searching for Betty. So nobody knows where Betty is. So like everybody's lost at this point. And so he says, "Gooby, go get Walsh, tell him what's happened to his niece." And Halsey starts tracking cars. So we got all sorts of stuff in motion now. Walsh is going to be getting guys together. So we'll have our angry mob. Ragheb is leading Betty into danger. Halsey's out tracking Kharis. Kharis is heading to the monastery with Ananka. A lot of movement here. Is it going to come together? Well, so Kharis gets back to the monastery, and so he begins climbing the stairs. And within the monastery, Ilzor is starting to prepare the Tana solution so that he could turn Ananka back into a mummy, which is basically his whole plan. And at that point, Kharis walks in, puts Ananka into her sarcophagus. So danger is at the highest peak right now for Ananka. And at this point also, Ragheb gets back to the monastery with Betty and starts creeping her out and makes a play for her. And so we kind of, in a lot of the other movies, we had the high priest starting to fall in love with the victim and kind of going back on his oath. Here, it's Ragheb who's going back on his oath because he's got the hots for Betty all of a sudden. Well, I mean, Kay Harding's pretty cute, so you guess you can understand that. But Ilzor comes out and sees what's happening and curses Ragheb for breaking his oath, in the name of Amun-Ra. So Ragheb is in trouble here. And I think this is easily Ilzor's best scene. So congratulations to Peter Coe for that. And here he explains, look, if this is going to be worked, their bodies can't be preserved unless the girl dies, which Ragheb does not like one bit. And obviously Betty's not real thrilled with the idea either. And Ragheb isn't going to take this lying down. So he pulls a knife and he stabs Ilzor in the back. So our high priest has just been taken out by his minion. And at this point, Halsey shows up to sort all these knuckleheads out. And Ragheb tries to kill him. We get a big fight. It's actually a pretty good action scene. Now, the fella playing Halsey did a lot of Westerns and stuff, so he was used to this kind of stuff. And this is pretty good, although it does kind of take the focus off of Kharis and Ananka at a moment when you think there'd be more focus on them, because this is happening in a different room. So we sort of, maybe if this was all taking place in the same room, it would have worked a little bit better. But overall, a good scene. And so Halsey knocks out Ragheb and jumps up, starts screaming, "I am the greatest, bring me Kharis." No, he knocks him out, but he actually doesn't knock him out for real long. So Kharis finally reacts to all this nonsense and comes out, looks like he's about to say, "Do you mind?" And at that point, Ragheb had gotten back up and he's trying to take Halsey out, and Kharis sort of intervenes and starts, coming towards Ragheb. And Ragheb is going, "Listen, as he's backing away, if you kill me, the secret of the Tana leaves will be lost forever." Which maybe is true. I guess Kharis kind of knows how to do it though, but maybe not. Well, either way, Ragheb is grasping at straws at this point. And you can't blame them because typically if a mummy's going after you, that's the end of you. So Ragheb kind of like backs into this cell and shuts the door and locks it. And while this is happening, Betty is getting, awakening Halsey. And so Kharis just starts tearing the place apart. Forget old man strength. He's got old mummy strength. And at this point, the mob shows up at the monastery, and you really don't need them, honestly, at this point. They don't add anything to the movie. So Ragheb is trapped like a rat, and Kharis is coming after him. And as he smashes down the door of the cell, the whole ceiling starts to fall in. And you get a big scene of everything crashing down. But Betty and Halsey are okay. And anybody remember Ananka? Ananka? Anyone? Well, at this point, Gooby runs out of that other room, screaming, "It isn't human." He got a couple good lines in this one. A couple also that weren't that great. And here's Ananka returned to her mummy state. Basically kind of screwed again. And this is the same problem I had with the last movie. Amina Mansouri was not a revived mummy like Kharis. She was a flesh and blood human woman with parents, with a life, with hopes, with dreams, who embodies this soul of Ananka, and as a result is basically her life is destroyed, and nobody seems to care one little bit about this. Like, they all kind of act like she's just a mummy, like Kharis was, and that's really not the case. So it's kind of sad. I was hoping that we were going to get, somehow she was going to survive. She was so hopeful and full of life in the movie, and actress did such a good job with it, and it just all ends this way. But hey, Halsey's happy because I got my mummies back. We'll dig Kharis out of the rubble, and we'll return them both to the museum. Well, Lottie frickin' da. So again, kind of a really flawed ending, although a much better ending than the last film. There's a lot more activity, a lot more action. It comes together. It's not just like 15 minutes of padding with very little happening, but still a really sad ending. And it doesn't feel like a sad ending to me that was earned, through the plot, through the narrative of where you kind of go, oh yeah, I get it. It's just sort of like, well, Ananka's screwed. Off we go. I do love, though, at the end, where Betty gives this little wink. Kay Harding was really good in this movie. But again, it's like the focus of the movie shifted to Betty at the end of the film, where she hardly had been in the movie up until then. She really had only had a couple scenes. And all of a sudden, the focus is off Ananka and on to Betty. So kind of odd the way they worked it. Not in love with it, honestly. I think it was it had a lot more potential. The ending was going well. Kind of flubbed at the end, though, with the way it went. That's just my opinion on this one, though. And so we reach the end of The Mummy's Curse and of the Mummy sequels. And I had a fun time going through all these. Look, I do have some problems with some of the movies, but on the whole, I enjoy them for the most part. And I'd say maybe Mummy's Ghost might be the one that I wouldn't want to watch again. But all the rest of them I'd happily watch again. Some flaws, but they're fun movies. They're fun old horror flicks, kind of B movies. But so, you kind of know what you're getting. We get good performances from Virginia Christine and from Kay Harding. They did a great job. Lon Chaney, great as the Mummy. Although again, there's only so much he gets to do in the Mummy character. I like Cajun Joe. I thought he did a good job with that. I like Martin Kozlak as Ragheb. Again, I would have liked to see more of him because he can be so menacing in movies. If you've seen him, you know what I'm talking about. But overall, everybody's fine in the movie. I don't think there were any performances that were like really bad or anything. I think, let's bring down the spoiler alert here, and we'll bring up our movie poster. There's some flaws in these films. They are short films, and the first and third definitely felt like there was some padding. And so when you're padding a movie that's only an hour long anyways, it says you probably need a stronger story. And I think with a little more work, I think the story in all four of these films could have been made a little bit stronger. They could have put a little bit more focus on the horror aspects. And I think sometimes they sort of had too many characters running around, and it took some of the focus off of where it needed to be and kind of reduced the emotional impact that other characters could have had. So I think writing's the key on this one, because again, makeup, the sets were all nice, the acting generally pretty good. All of them had at least one or two people in them that were quite charismatic and fun. Chaney was great. But there you go. So in the final analysis, how do I rate these movies? Let's go from, again, my opinion, worst to best. At number 5, The Mummy's Ghost. I'd probably give that one star. The whole ending thing just collapses, and it's kind of a bummer to boot. Number 4, I would go The Mummy's Hand with 2 stars. Again, its problem was padding, and, it took forever to get to Kharis really doing anything. Some good stuff in it, but I think it suffered because of that. At number 3, I would put The Mummy's Curse. I'd give it 2.5, almost 3 stars. Much more energetic performances, but still kind of a sad ending that just didn't feel quite right to me. Number 2, I would put The Mummy's Tomb. I really like that one. I'd give it about 3 stars. Great old age performances from a couple of the characters who were in The Mummy's Hand. That one I liked a bit. Definitely number 1 is The Mummy, 1932 with Boris Karloff. I'd give it 4 stars. It can be a little bit slow here and there, but I think it had a good, creepy, and somewhat meaningful storyline to it with some really good performances. But there we go. So I've reached the end of the Mummy movies. I hope everybody has a happy Halloween. Get some good candy, get some caramel apples, have some punch, some hot apple cider. That'd be really good. Now I'm going to relax with a little Tana tea. I'm going to go sit down. It's finally turning kind of cold here in Las Vegas, so I'm going to maybe cuddle up with a good book. Probably a comic book, knowing me. But I hope everybody has a happy Halloween. I'd love to hear in the comments what you think of this movie or all the Mummy movies. Let me know. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Maybe think of subscribing. Maybe share with a friend. Until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. And I will hopefully see you again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.